Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Christ the royal master leads against the foe. Forward into battle, see his banners go. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Oh, for a faith that will not shrink, though pressed by every foe, that will not tremble on the brink of any earthly woe, that will not murmur or complain beneath a chastening rod, but in the hour of grief or pain will lean upon its God. A faith that shines more bright and clear when tempests rage without, that when in danger knows no fear, in darkness feels no doubt. Lord, give us such a faith as this, and then whatever may come, we'll taste and hear the hallowed bliss of an eternal home. A charge to keep I have, a God to glorify, a never-dying soul to save, and fitted for the sky, to serve the present age, my calling to fulfill. Oh, may it all my powers engage to do my Master's will. Arm me with jealous care, as in thy sight to live, and o' thy servant, Lord, prepare a strict account to give. Help me to watch and pray, and on thyself rely. Assured if I my trust betray, I shall forever die. Rise up, O men of God, have done with lesser things. Give heart and mind and soul and strength to serve the King of Kings. Rise up, O men of God, his kingdom tarries long. Bring in the day of brotherhood and end the night of wrong. Rise up, O men of God, the church for you doth wait. Her strength unequal to her task, rise up and make her great. Lift high the cross of Christ, tread where his feet have trod. As brothers of the Son of Man, rise up, O men of God. Good afternoon. Let's edify one another, shall we? Welcome to another episode of the study to show ourselves approved unto God, where we strive to do just that, study to show ourselves approved unto God, workmen that needeth not to be ashamed, handling aright the word of truth. We seek to be approved unto God, not unto men. And as such, we then open the scriptures and peruse his word. And this episode, or this particular series of lessons, is over Genesis. And we pick up where we left off last week in Genesis, at the beginning of Genesis 16. And in Genesis 16, we have a new arrival. Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she has a female servant, an Egyptian servant, and her name is Hagar. Sarai says to Abram, I'm tired of waiting on the Lord. Lord's way has prevented me from bearing children, so here's what we're going to do. You go in to Hagar, and when she conceives, then she can bear her child upon my knees, perhaps, and or rather, going to my servant, it may be that I shall obtain children by her. So Abram listens to Sarai, and so after 10 years of having lived in Canaan, this is 10 years after he has returned from the land of Egypt. Abram's wife takes Hagar, gives her to Abram as a concubine, as a wife. Now, this is not, she doesn't have the same status as the full status of Sarai, because Sarai is the first wife. But she is, in all essences, Abram's wife. And so Hagar conceives, and when she does conceive, she begins to despise her mistress. And so it's the same case as we find later in 1 Samuel chapter 1, where Elkanah has two wives, and you have Hannah and Peninnah, and Peninnah, she's fruitful. She has plenty of children, and she looks down upon Hannah because Hannah has no children. You see, for the longest period of time in most societies, a woman is judged, and a man for that matter, is judged by whether or not they are able to bear children. If a man has no heirs, he is looked down upon as being less than a person. And so the same is said for a woman. And a man doubly so if he's unable to bear a male heir, because then he has no one to continue his name. Well, this is the same situation. In their culture, Sarai is unable to bear children, and so her handmaiden, her servant, despises her mistress. And Sarai comes to Abram and says, it's your fault. I gave my handmaid to you, and now that she sees that she can conceive, I'm cast down. I'm made lower in her eyes. I have no authority. So, the Lord judge between me and thee. In other words, Sarai is saying, you need to back me up. I am the first wife. I am your wife, and you need to stand behind me, or stand by me, rather. And Abram says unto Sarai, he says, behold, it's your handmaid. Do with her what you will. So Sarai carries it to the extreme, though. Even though Hagar is Sarai's handmaid, even though Hagar is Abram's wife, second wife, concubine, um, she's not got the same standing. She doesn't have the same authority. And so Sarai, being her mistress, as in being first wife, as well as being mistress over her, punishes her and treats her, or rather treats her very, very harshly. And so harshly, in fact, that Hagar decides to run away. Think of the unbearable situation that it would be a for a person to leave security and of their position, or of their family and of their home, and run away while pregnant. And then you get an idea of how bad Sarai treated Hagar. What this does is it goes to show that God does not whitewash people. Even though these are people of faith, even though Abram and Sarai are listed in Faith's Hall of Fame, even though they are extolled as people that we are to look up to, they still, as men and women, have their failings. And Abram, he lied. Sarai, she was a harsh mistress when, at times, and it was an unbearable situation for Hagar. And so she flees, she runs away. And also remember that here Hagar is in the wilderness, verse 7, and there is no protection. There are no men of arms watching out for her protection. In a land where there would be robbers, there would be brigands, bandits, however you want to say it, men of ill repute, or as the Bible likes to say, men of Belial. And so she flees from Sarai, choosing to go into that situation rather than continue in security, and yet in such a harsh environment. So she runs into the wilderness, and the angel of the Lord finds her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, and he says to her, now we could go off on another tangent and talk about the angel of the Lord. And I will briefly note that the majority of times in the Old Testament, when you see the phrase "the angel of the Lord," it is speaking with a definitive article, the angel of the Lord, and it is typically used of the Word. Remember, in John chapter 1, verse 1, we find that the Word was in the beginning, or in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, the same was in the beginning with God. Well, all things were created by him, and we know that if all things were created by him, and in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, Genesis 1:1, then when we see that the Lord, and we see that this is the messenger of the Lord, we can then, in a lot of times, understand that this is Jesus before he came to earth as man. There are other clues found throughout the Old Testament, such as times when the angel of the Lord accepted worship, which no other heavenly being did. The amount uh, of foreknowledge that the angel of the Lord had, um, and the amount and the things that the angel of the Lord did or said are indicative of him, or are what the deciding factors are between whether or not it is the Lord or it is an actual heavenly messenger. In this case, the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain, and he says to her, Hagar, Sarah's maid, whence camest thou, and whither wilt thou go? So here we have foreknowledge. He knew her name, and he really knew where she was from and where she was going, because he says, Hagar, Sarai's maid. Okay. And he does this to get her mind thinking. Oftentimes, we cannot fix a problem until we remove ourselves from the emotion of the moment and begin to think rationally. And one of the ways that we do that is if somebody gives us questions that channel our mind and our energy towards a particular aim. Okay, when did you come from? Where are you going? And you begin, and Sarai, or rather Hagar, begins to remove herself from emotion and rather begin thinking rationally. She says, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai. The Lord then says, return unto her, or the angel of the Lord says to her, return to thy mistress and submit thyself under her hands. Now notice here, first off, he commands her with all authority. Return to thy mistress. You return. He doesn't say, God says, return to your mistress. He says, return to your mistress. He also says, submit yourself under her hands. There is no other alternative. In verse 10, we see the angel of the Lord saying to her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. So what we are seeing then is those indicators within the text, like I said, of the message saying that this is the pre-incarnate Christ, as we call it. This is God, or this is Jesus, the Son, the Word, before he became flesh and dwelt among us. 1 John 1 verses 1 through 4 and 14. He says, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. This was the promise that he gave to Abraham, and he is extending that promise to Hagar, because what she has within her is of the seed of Abraham. It is by extension, and therefore that promise does extend to her. The angel of the Lord says to her, behold, thou art with child and shall bear a son, and shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. So God says to her, you are with child, foreknowledge. You are going to bear a son, foreknowledge, and you shall call his name Ishmael, foreknowledge and direction. And then here's the reasoning, because God hath heard your affliction. And if we were to look at the word Ishmael here, it means God will hear. And it's actually Yishmael, but Ishmael, who cares? Ismael. And it means God will hear. And it's a beautiful name. God will hear. But then he goes on to give her a prophecy. He's going to be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. In fact, we could, in one essence, trace Ishmael's lineage and see that even today, those of Ishmael's lineage are again against every man, and every man's hand against him. The Arabians, for example, they bear some of them bear within them the seed of Abraham. They bear within them the genetics of Ishmael. Many of those in that country. Not all of them, but many of them. So Ishmael's going to be a wild man. He's going to be one that dwells in wild places. And we find later, just as a spoiler alert, that he and his descendants become traders. They become those who wander back and forth, taking goods from one place to another and selling them, buying one place, selling in another. So she calls the name of the place where God spake unto her, Thou God seest me. Therefore it's called Beer Lahairoi, which you see down here in 14. Beer Lahairoi, which means the Lord, Thou God seest me. For she said, Have I also here looked after him that seeth me? So she recognizes that who is talking with her is God. And she understands the divine nature of the prophecy, as in that God has given her a prophecy about her son. What kind of hope do you think that this would offer to Hagar? And I pause so that CJ can field any questions. Matter of fact, we're almost down. I'll go ahead and finish out the chapter, then we'll pause. So the well is called Beer Lahairoi, and it is between Kadesh and Bered. Moses here, as the author of Genesis, gives us the specific location where this well is located. I call your attention to this because multiple times within the scriptures, God gives us time, he gives us location, and he gives us specifics of both time, location, and people that would be easily referenced. For example, here we have Kadesh and Bered. Other places we have King David, we have King Solomon. We also utilize places like in the Garden of Eden. He talks about how that there was a river that flows through and waters the Garden of Eden, and then after it leaves the garden, it becomes 4 rivers. One of which is the Tigris, and one of which is the Euphrates, or the Hiddekel and the Euphrates. And so he gives specifics, and even down into the New Testament, we have in the days of Caesar Augustus, when Herod was king, we have Pontius Pilate, and there's just specifics that are listed that are so detailed that you cannot help but marvel at the wisdom and the foreknowledge of God. I'll just put it at that. You can't help it because he proves beyond a shadow of doubt with these geographical as well as his era and his archaeological knowledge that it can be borne out by geography, by archaeology, and of course by people, by well, that's still part of archaeology. Anyway, we'll leave it at that. Hagar. So Hagar comes back and she bears Abram a son. Abram did call his name Ishmael because that's what God had told Hagar to call him. And Abram was 86 years old. That's 80. A score is 20 years. So when it says 80, you take 4 times 20. And you get 80, and then 86, when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abram. So we have a time established. Abram, 86 years old, when his first son was born. Are there any questions over chapter 16 that perhaps CJ can answer for you?
Any questions or comments over 16? All right.
And I will pause for a few minutes. Well, actually, CJ can go ahead and pause this video here and now. Okay, so we continue on in Genesis chapter 17. When Abram was 90 years old then, so this is 4 years later. Well, actually, no, it wasn't. It was 14 years later. Abram's 13 years later. Abram was 99 years old. He has a visitation from God, and God says to him, I am the Almighty God. Walk before me and be thou perfect. Now, we're not told how God appeared unto him. It doesn't say whether he appeared to him in the form of a man, whether he appeared to him in a vision, or just what. But we do know that God appeared unto Abram. And he says to him, I am the Almighty. Walk before me, be thou perfect. I will make my covenant between me and thee, and I will multiply thee exceedingly. So God reiterates his covenant between him and Abram in that he's going to give him or make him a nation, make of him a nation or many nations. And Abram, what do you think is going to happen when you have have God appear in front of you? Whether he appeared as, in whatever form he appeared. Moses, he appeared as a burning bush. To Elijah, he appeared as a still small voice. Whatever way he appeared, Abram's initial reaction shows reverence, and it shows worship, and he knows who he's talking to. And God talks with him. Not like he talks to Moses face to face, as in standing there with talking with a cloud or talking with a pillar of fire. But he talks to Moses kind of as a man does a friend almost. As for me, God says, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of many nations. There again, he's making him that nation covenant. Now, you can't be called Abram anymore, because Abram doesn't mean father of many nations. It doesn't suit you anymore. What does Abram mean? Hi, Father. Hi. Yeah, I know I did that one. CJ just went, uh-huh. Anyway, it means high father. Another way to look at it is exalted father, Avram. So God says, I'm going to make you a father of many nations. And so exalted father is not going to apply. It's not going to work. And so we need to change it. And we're going to change it to Abraham. Now, you're thinking, well, that's okay. You're only adding 2 letters. You're only adding an H and an A. You go from Abram to Abraham. And so you have father of a multitude, or a chief of multitude. One might even say an exalted father of a multitude. perhaps. But the idea is that he stops being it stops being the exalted father as of a father of one or just of a small family, to being a father of a multitude. And with the change in name comes a change in relationship. And notice who it is that is changing Abram's name. It's not Abram. It's not Sarai. It's not Hagar or any one of the people around them. It's God himself. And the reason he changes his name from Abram, exalted father, to Abraham is because God has made Abraham a father of many nations. And so he doesn't just stop there. I'm going to make you exceedingly fruitful. A man from whom nations are going to come and kings. Now, this is why I get to the idea that, he's going to be an exalted father of many nations, because he's not just going to be a father of nations, but there's going to be kings coming out of thee. And this is looking forward to, indeed, into the very last king that comes from Abraham. So God says, I'm going to establish my covenant between me and between you, between me and your seed after you in their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto you and to your seed after you. And I'm going to give to you and to your seed this land wherein you are a stranger. So remember, Ishmael was born 10 years after he returned from Egypt and had been dwelling in the land of Canaan. And this now, he's been in the land for 23 years. And God says, I'm going to give you this land. Even though you've been living here for 23 years, you're still a stranger. You don't have a permanent home. You don't have an everlasting, you don't have a possession of this. But I'm going to give it to you and your seed, and I will be their God. Consider, if you would, the impact that this verse, this promise has upon Abraham. Not just the fact that he's going to be giving the land to them, but specifically, you have this one and this aspect of it. These two underlined phrases: God promises to be a God unto Abraham and to his seed after him. As a father, I want the best for my children. And as a father, Abraham wanted the best for his. And the fact that God would be with him and with his seeds, with his children after him, really brings a sense of comfort, a sense of stability, and a sense of awe and gratitude to Abraham. Oh. Boom, 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 boom. But then God says to Abraham, you're going to need to keep my covenant, therefore. You, your seed after you, in their generations. And here is my covenant. Okay, I'm going to give this land and exchange, and I will be their God. But in exchange, you've got to keep my words. You've got to do what I command you. And this is the command. This is the symbol of the covenant. Every man-child among you shall be circumcised. If you want this land and this nation blessing, if you want me for your God, you must be circumcised. You know, it's a precursor of what was to come later that Paul would refer to as the circumcision of the heart. This was the circumcision of the flesh, but there was a circumcision of the heart that came later. And God, again, has always required obedience. If we want him to be our God, if we want the blessings that are found in him, or as a result, or from him, then we need to do what he has said. Now, God tells Abraham, you shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin. It shall be a token of the covenant betwixt me and you. And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every man-child in your generations. He that is born in the house or bought with money of any stranger which is not thy seed. He that is born in thy house and he that is bought with thy money must needs be circumcised, and my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. It is the same symbol, or in the same manner that the rainbow is in the cloud. Every time that it rains and that there is a rainbow, there is the symbol, there is the covenant in the clouds. Or there is, I should say, the token of the covenant in the clouds. Well, in this case, circumcision was the token of the covenant between God and Abraham and Abraham's descendants. As soon as they turned 8 days old, they had to be circumcised. They had to be circumcised on their 8th day. Every male child, not just some, every male child, not just the firstborn, every male child. He that is born in the house and he that was bought with the money of the money from any stranger. If he is part of your household, he needs to be circumcised. If he is not circumcised, if he is uncircumcised, he shall not be part of the covenant, because he hath broken my covenant. He shall not receive the blessings of the covenant. In every case, in every covenant, God has given clear definition of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. He did it here with Abraham. Circumcision avails blessings. Uncircumcision disavails the blessings. And he that breaks my covenant is cut off. It's sundered. It's broken away. Now, he goes on in verse 15 and following to reassure Abraham. He says unto Abraham, it's time also to change Sarai's name. You're not going to call her Sarai, but Sarah. I'm going to bless her and give you a son from her as well. She shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be of her. So let's look at Sarah. Sarai means princess. Very cool, right? Sarai is princess. And Sarai she was very beautiful. She was princess among women. But Sarah means noble woman. I'm not sure. That doesn't really seem... It seems the same to me, but there's a difference. One might say Sarai is the princess, but Sarah is the queen. And that would be a much better reference. If we looked at this one compares it to H8282, which is Sarah or Sarah, and it means lady, princess, and queen. Now, where that one's used, I don't know. Oh, okay. Interesting. So, again, Sarah is more of a... Sarah is the proper noun versus the other one we just looked at was the descriptive. So Sarah would be the definition or the meaning of the word Sarah would be more since it's noble woman, or what do we say that was? Noble woman. It would be the same as princess, or not princess, as queen. So Sarai is princess, and Sarah has grown out of the name and now is queen. So as Abraham becomes the father of many nations, Sarah becomes the queen. And God says, I will bless her. I will give you a son from her, and she shall be the mother of nations. Kings of people shall be of her. Well, kings come from queens most of the time. Sometimes they're elected. Sometimes they're made just because of some heroic deed, but most of the time they come from queens. So Abraham does something rather like what we would do. Let's face it, we're not perfect. Neither was Abraham. He's 99 years old. He's past the age-bearing years. One would have said he was past the age-bearing years when he was 86 years old. But he falls upon his face laughing and says in his heart, he's stunned. Shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old? This is not natural, he says. And what about Sarah, who's 90 years old? Shall she bear? It's not natural. Interesting point. Notice that immediately Abraham was calling his wife Sarah, not Sarai. I want you to notice that, because that's how fast Abraham adopted the commands of God. Abraham said unto God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before thee." He tried to put in a good word for Ishmael, but God says, "Nuh-uh." He's not having any of it. He says, "Sarah, your wife, shall bear a son, and you will call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. As for Ishmael, I've heard you. I will bless him. I will make him fruitful. I will multiply him." We can look at this section right here. And try it right back to chapter 16 where we were at, where he told Hagar that he will be, where was it? There it is. I will make thy seed, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, and it shall not be numbered for multitude. So Genesis 16:10, it correlates with Genesis 17 and verse 20. Let me get that put in there. Oh. So God says, I have done that. I've already made him fruitful. I have already blessed him. I will make him fruitful. I will multiply him exceedingly. In fact, 12 princes are going to come out of him, and I'm going to make him a great nation. But my covenant will be established with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this set time in the next year. So God pinpoints it even further and says, it is at this time, next year, that Sarah will have a son. And so God leaves Abraham in shocked amazement at that point. He just leaves him. And God goes up from Abraham. He disappears. So Abraham, now remember I said that Abraham quickly or immediately begins to adopt God's command. Shall Sarah, that is 90 years old, bear? He's saying this in his heart. He's not saying, shall Sarai, that is 90 years old, bear? He says, shall Sarah, that is 90 years old, bear? Immediately, as soon as God said, I'm changing her name from Sarai to Sarah. And so as soon as God leaves, what does Abraham do? He goes and he was circumcised. Him, Ishmael, who was 13 years old, and all of the men in Ishmael's house, in Abraham's house, were born there or bought with money. They were all circumcised. Abraham didn't let grass grow underneath his feet when it came to doing what God wanted him to do. And neither should we. Okay. So I think that I am actually going to. Oh, should we get into that? Yeah, why not? We got about 20 minutes left. We're doing good, CJ. We're going to pause here as well for some more comments, or if there are any comments or not, and comments or questions over that last chapter. And I'm sure CJ's probably boiling with some comments that he wants to make in addition to mine. So have at it, and we'll pause and we'll come back when he's finished.
Any questions or comments? It's interesting when you take that farther. He touched on the sign of the covenant in chapter 17 and that's going to be an everlasting covenant. And then you go to Galatians chapter 4, and really the book of Galatians, and we see that, first of all, in Colossians 2:10 through 12, circumcision is part of our covenant when we're baptized, and it's those who have faith like Abraham are sons of Abraham, so we get to be a part of his generation. So that's kind of an interesting thing there. I may have to do a lesson on that. Any other questions or comments? That's the brief thing I had. Alright, let's get into chapter 18.
Okay, picking up in Genesis chapter 18, we have a while later again. We're not told exactly when, but the Lord comes to at a later point in Abraham's 99th year. He comes to Abraham and he says unto him while he's sitting in the plains of Mamre, in the door of his tent in the heat of the day. So it's very hot out. Abraham it's too hot to go do anything. So Abraham's sitting in the door of his tent, taking in the breeze as it's blowing, or as he's trying to cool off. And he's sitting there, and whether he's napping, he is 99 years old after all, or he just happens to be reading or doing whatever, we just know that he was sitting in the door of his tent. And whatever it was, he happened to glance up and he sees three men standing by him, or rather walking to him. We know that we see three men stood by him, which basically is in the general area of the camp. He sees them by the camp somewhere. And so when he sees them, he runs to meet them. So he gets up, he runs from the door of his tent to wherever they're at, and he bows himself towards the ground. Think of it think of what Abraham's thinking as he's like, he happens to glance up and see three men standing where there had been nobody standing just a moment before. Of course, he's going to get up, but even then, he doesn't know that this is God. This is just three men standing there. And what we see then is Abraham's very hospitable, because he goes up and he says, "My Lord," and this would be Adonai, I believe. Let me look. Yep, Adonai, which basically is the same. Strong says that it's used as a proper name of God only. However, I believe it's used in other places. It is used, like Brown Driver Big says, it is used of men as well in places. It is used a total of 432 times. Let's see. Let's see. Just as a way of using it in reference to man. I want to show, and when it shall come to pass, this is, I think, of Nabal's wife, Abigail. Yep, I was right. we're dealing with Abigail and how she comes to David after Nabal was being churlish, and she says to him in verse 30, "And it shall come to pass when the Lord, that is Jehovah, shall have done to my Lord, that is Adon, according to all that the good that he hath spoken concerning thee, and shall have appointed thee ruler over Israel, that this shall be no grief unto thee, nor offense of heart unto my Lord," that's Adon, neither or either that which thou hast shed. And again, we go through down Adon, Adonai, and this one here is Jehovah, but Adon it's trying to see, it's all 113. But Adon is a form of Adonai, which is, of course, been then used in reference to man, as we've been trying to say. 31. This is H136. I didn't see 136 used in this section. Interesting. Huh. Okay. Interesting. Anyway, and so anyway, Adonai Adonai is a derivative of Adon, or Adon is a derivative of Adonai, whichever way you want to say it. It's an emphatic form of H113, which is Adon. And so what we see then, getting back to our text, is that Abraham comes up and says, "My Lord, if now I have found favor." He doesn't know for certain that this is God. He's just coming and using this as a as the nom de plume, as a title of respect for someone he doesn't know. And as we would say, "Sir," or as you would say in the old days, if we were still in England, for example, "My Lord" would be something that would be said to anyone that we don't we don't know their status, especially if they're dressing fine. So Abraham's using this in reference to respect. And he says, "My Lord, if now I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, from thy servant." And he offers food and water to refresh them. And he would have done this to any passerby. This was long before the days of the telephone and the TV and the radio. It was long before the days of newspapers. And so the only way that people got news of things going on was from other travelers. And so any traveler was welcome at most tents, most fires, and people were more hospitable to them because of that. We've lost a lot in this day and age because of how readily accessible information is to us in these days and times. So Abraham's going to fetch a morsel of bread and offer them refreshment, comfort to your hearts, and after which then you can pass on and go to wherever you're going. And they agree. So what we find here in Genesis 18:6 and following is he runs into the tent, says to Sarah, "Hey, make ready some food. We've got visitors." And then he runs to the herd, fetches a calf that's tender and good, and he gives it to a young man and has him quickly dress it so they can throw some meat on the fire. You see, they didn't have refrigeration during those days either. It's amazing how far technology has come, isn't it, CJ? And he took butter and milk and the calf which he had dressed and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree, and they did eat. So here's another thing that's interesting. As the host, Abraham didn't sit down and eat with them. He stood as a servant to them until they had finished eating. And it's something that is fascinating and gives us a glimpse of Abraham, which I probably said Moses, but anyway, I meant Abraham. Abraham stood there as a servant, and he served them, even though he was the host, even though he was the supplier of all of this to them. But he waited on them. And the fascinating thing is even Jesus took time to be the servant, even though he truly is the host. And we're going to pick up there next week. We're going to stop and start in Genesis 18 and verse 9. Thank you all. And hopefully I'm going to let CJ answer any questions again that you might have. And hopefully you have been edified by our time together as we strive to study to show ourselves approved unto God. Again, we're not striving to be approved by man. We're not caring whether man approves of us or not. We seek to only be approved by God. And that means we have to open up God's word so that we can learn to handle it correctly.
Any questions or comments before we close? Like, circumcision was an antitype. Well, he was just being hospitable. Yeah, definitely the culture was more hospitable that way, definitely. Even that carries over in the New Testament when you get to Romans 12. We're supposed to be hospitable as well.
As you go through your daily walk with him, won't you study to show yourself approved? I'll see you then. God.